This video was brought to you by Henson Shaving. 15 years after the traumatic financial crisis and an EU bailout, Ireland's economic fortunes have changed dramatically. Thanks to a record corporate tax receipts and an EU court judgment requiring Apple to pay the Irish government another €14 billion in taxes, the Irish government is now on track to run its third consecutive budget surplus, a rarity in European politics. Unfortunately though, Ireland actually has, in some sense, too much money. So in this video, we're going to explain Ireland's change in fortunes, and why the government is actually struggling to spend its newfound fiscal space. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, let's start with a bit of history. For most of recent history, Ireland's economic prospects were limited by population decline and deindustrialisation under British rule. Prior to the Great Famine in 1840, there were roughly 8.2 million people living in Ireland. However, from independence in 1922 up until the 1960s, Ireland went through a period of economic stagnation, marked by heavy emigration, and the population fell to just 2.8 million in the late 50s. During that time, the economy was highly protectionist, and Ireland soon became one of the poorest countries in Western Europe. Now, there was a brief period of respite in the 1960s, when the country began to shift away from a rural agrarian economy to a more service-based economy. But even then, the Irish economy was badly affected by the oil crisis of the 70s. Growth slowed, and Ireland became beset by industrial strikes and political crises. In the early 80s, growth slowed yet again to about 2%. And Ireland became known as the sick man of Europe, with a GDP per capita roughly a third lower than that of the UK or France. It was only really in the 90s when Ireland really began converging towards its European neighbours. From 1995 to 2000, Ireland's growth averaged 9.4%, and in 2001 it achieved the highest GDP per capita in Western Europe, earning it the nickname the Celtic Tiger. While there have been some occasional hiccups, Ireland's rapid growth has basically continued since then, helped by its membership of the EU. Now, the main reason for Ireland's freakishly rapid GDP growth is its pro-business policies. In short, Ireland's open economy, functioning legal system, and perhaps most importantly, super low corporation tax rate of 12.5% have made it the tax haven of choice for Western multinationals, especially in the IT and pharmaceutical sectors. To give a few examples, in recent years, Google, Meta, Yahoo, eBay, and Amazon have all set up shop in Ireland. And to take advantage of Ireland's low corporation tax rate, these multinationals claim that most of their business takes the form of exports from their Irish subsidiaries, by claiming that they do all of their high-value research and development in Ireland. This massively inflates Ireland's GDP, which is why Ireland isn't actually as wealthy as its GDP figures make out. Anyway, even if Ireland's GDP is inflated, and these corporations are paying less tax than they would in, say, the US, this has still been amazing news for the Irish Treasury. That's because Ireland's corporation tax intake has gone from about €10 billion in 2019 to €23.8 billion in 2023, and is forecast to reach nearly €40 billion by the end of this year. Now, it's hard to overstate quite how amazing this should be for ordinary Irish taxpayers. After all, €40 billion comes to over €5,000 per Irish citizen, and is over 5 times as much corporation tax revenue per capita as the UK. More than 25% of tax revenue in Ireland now comes from corporation tax, compared to less than 10% across Europe. The Irish government is unsurprisingly on course to run a big budget surplus, its third in a row, and these are only expected to grow thanks to a fiscal rule limiting spending growth to 5% a year, and the fact that corporation tax revenues are expected to increase. This puts Ireland in a particularly envious position, given that most European countries are currently struggling with hefty deficits and debt levels, and leaves the government, a coalition of Ireland's centre-right parties and the Green Party, with plenty of spending options, because, well, there's a lot that needs improving. Ireland's housing, energy, water, and transport systems are increasingly strained under the pressures of a growing population and economy. This situation has been exacerbated by a decade of underinvestment that followed the 2008 financial crash, when public sector investment fell from 4% to less than 2%, the lowest rate in the EU. Ireland's public transport is in particularly dire need of repair, thanks to a particularly steep decline in investment. The country's water system is in disarray too, and fails to meet the EU's quality standards, while its ageing electricity grid is struggling to deal with the transition to renewables. Additionally, Ireland's facing a severe housing crisis. The central bank estimates that the country will need to build 52,000 new homes each year for the next 25 years just to keep pace with demand. And that's a lot of houses, approximately 50% more than this year's official target. And the situation is so bad that this housing crisis has forced 2/3 of young Irish adults in their mid to late 20s to live with their parents. Now, you might therefore assume that Ireland would be spending all of this newfound cash, upgrading its infrastructure and building new houses. However, that's not what's happened. Instead, Ireland is planning to put a lot of its cash into a new sovereign wealth fund, sparking a bit of irritation among the Irish public. So why isn't Ireland splashing the cash? Well, as we see it, there are at least 3 reasons. First, Ireland overspent during the Celtic tiger boom, causing both public expenditure and debt to GDP to double, only for it all to come tumbling down after the trauma of the 2008 financial crash, when Ireland needed a bailout from the EU. Secondly, the government worries that a spending spree might fuel inflation, which last year reached a record high of over 9%. And while it's cooled off this year, ministers might still want to stay on the safe side. Thirdly, the government, central bank, budget watchdogs, and a string of other economists have warned that Ireland's corporation tax receipts are volatile and unlikely to keep increasing at their current pace. There's also obviously a danger of relying so heavily on one source of income. If it wasn't for these corporate taxes, the country would be running its 17th consecutive annual deficit this year. What's more, just 10 companies accounted for over half of the receipts, and just 3 of these companies accounted for 1/3 of all receipts between 2017 and 2021. So if one of those has a slightly poor financial year, it could have a massive impact on Ireland's finances. All in all, with a possible election looming in the coming months, the government will have to figure out how to balance between wooing voters and heeding the advice of cautious economists. Nonetheless, whatever the government does, it will probably disappoint the electorate. And Ireland's predicament does suggest that a lack of cash isn't the only thing currently holding back stagnant Western economies. And getting this balance right will be a close-run thing. If you're sick of the gimmicks that other shaving brands use, the subscriptions, moisturizing strips, lasers, whatever, then you'll want to check out Henson. Because, and here's the dirty secret about the razor industry, even the cheapest dollar store disposable razor will likely give you a reasonably good shave. The challenge is the impact they'll have on your skin. So to protect your skin while shaving, you need to actually support the blade properly. And Henson can provide that quality shave, even with cheap blades, thanks to the Henson razor, which they produce at their aerospace machine shop, which has also produced parts for the ISS, and which perfectly holds blades at a 30-degree angle, and extends them only 0.0013 inches, less than the width of a human hair. In classic TLDR style, that's important for 3 reasons. Firstly, it's way cheaper. Those fancy blade cartridges aren't necessarily designed to provide a better experience for shaving. They're about jacking up prices. Instead, Henson's razor takes standard razor blades that cost just 10 cents each, meaning that while the initial handle might be more expensive, in the long run, you'll save a ton of cash. Secondly, it's far better for the environment to be using individual blades rather than joining the 2 billion razor cartridges thrown away every year in the US alone, with Henson's products containing no plastic at all, even in their packaging. Finally, this superb engineering and precise blade tech just provides an incredible shave. If you want to try it out, click the link in the description, then add a razor and 100 blades to your cart. Once you've done that, use our discount code TLDR at checkout, and you'll get all of those blades totally free.